Today we are going to speak about Pu'erh, and more precisely about aged Sheng Pu'er. Hi guys, this is Gabriele from nannuoshan, where we share the pleasure of drinking and discovering genuine farm tea. If you're new in our channel and you're also looking to expand your tea knowledge and brewing skills, then make sure to click on the subscribe button. And if at any point of time you enjoy watching, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. There was actually one of you, Farmer Bob, that a few weeks ago posted a comment on a video that we made about Pu'erh, asking why actually people like aged Sheng Pu'er. Farmer Bob just started drinking Pu'er. He started drinking young Pu'er, and then when he moved over to aged Pu'er, he couldn't really understand why there is such a hype about it. And this is in fact a very interesting topic, and thank you very much, Farmer Bob, for proposing it. And I've collected some information that I have gathered over the years to prepare this and actually next video. In fact, there are two important aspects, in my opinion, that we have to speak about to truly understand why tea enthusiasts start drinking aged Sheng Pu'er and get simply stuck there, why they love that. And in this video I will treat the first of those aspects, which is one of the most neglected actually, and in my opinion the most important and relevant one. And then in the next video I will treat the second aspect. I will tell you more about that actually towards the end of this video. To get some inspiration before starting the video, I started drinking this tea here. This is a raw Sheng Pu'er, so a Sheng Pu'er from 2006, so it has been aged already 14 years. It is this cake here. And it is from the Nannuo mountain. It is not the cake that you find on our website, it's actually just my private collection, I bought it just for me. But yeah, very tasty indeed. And it brings me a little bit into the mood of aged Sheng Pu'er. So first of all, what is Sheng Pu'er? So very shortly, Pu'er is a tea that comes only from Yunnan. There is a legislation in China that demand that if a tea is branded as Pu'er, it has to come from Yunnan, and actually it's even more restricted. It may come only from specific regions in Yunnan. Moreover, Pu'er must be made with the variety Assamica, with the Camellia sinensis variety Assamica, which is the big leaf variety that, if not pruned, would develop in large trees. And what about the name Sheng Pu'er? Sheng means raw, like uncooked, and Pu'er is actually a name of a city in Yunnan, and until some years ago was also the name of a county. So now, how it is Pu'er produced, manufactured? So after you have picked the leaves, the leaves from the variety Assamica, the first thing you do a short withering. After the withering, you kill the green, so you heat up the leaves to stop the enzymatic action. The wood oxidize the leaves. Sorry. Then you roll the leaves to shape and you dry them under the sun. Sun drying is very important. Then in most of the cases the dried leaves are brought to the factory. In the factory they are steamed so that they become a little bit wet and soft. They are pressed into a cake and then they are dried at the air. So at the end you have your Pu'er, and then you have to age it to make it developing his flavor actually. And now, it's not only about aging. So if you look what really tea enthusiasts love about Sheng Pu'er, they love if it is aged, for sure. The older, the better. But they also love if it is made from ancient trees, what we call Gushu. Gu means ancient, Shu means tree, so ancient trees, Pu'er. Also in this case, the older the trees, the better. So you have two dimensions of being old, age in the cake and the age of the tree. Moreover, if the tea comes from a single garden, or even if it comes from a single tree, even better. And if you combine those, it's like ecstasies. Alright, so now to truly understand why we love aged Sheng Pu'er, we have really to understand the history of Pu'er, which is very much neglected. And this is what I want to talk to you about. I want to give you a lot of insights about what happened in the past centuries in Yunnan, in China and abroad that brought us where we are today. So we have to jump really far back in the past, and we know that already in the 8th century, so more than 1000 years ago, Yunnan were producing compressed tea for export to Tibet. And they were trading actually with horses, and that's why we have also the ancient tea horse road. And if we now jump more to the modern era and we look about what happened actually in the 18th and the 19th century, at that time EU, which is a famous village for Pu'erh, a very crucial name that you want to remember, was actually a very important tea trade center. Trading tea for what? It was just a trading center for exporting tea to Hong Kong. So again abroad. Not only Tibet, where tea actually was used as a main, like a meal actually, yeah, more for nutrition. In Hong Kong was more for pleasure. In fact, Hong Kong people were really fond of dim sum, of yum cha, and yum cha are very grassy and they go well along with aged Sheng Pu'er, which help the digestion. So they really like the pairing, and you have to think that at that time in China there was no railway and of course no flight, so the tea have to be brought to Hong Kong by land and sea. And I heat up the water. And by land and sea, what does it mean? It means that the tea from EU was brought to Puerh city, and then from there it was brought by land to Vietnam and even farther to Thailand, and then from there, from the harbor, was brought overseas to Hong Kong. So the journey was several months, and it was not in dry condition. Like the tea was exposed to air, exposed to sunlight, exposed to wind, exposed to rain. So the aging was really quick. By the time it arrived in Hong Kong and was presented in the tea houses, it was already fairly aged. And now we come also to another aspect actually of Pu'erh. I hope it's not too loud. It's soon finished. Yeah. And branding. So Pu'erh, I believe, is the first tea ever that was branded. The first company, Pu'erh company, was founded in 1736, and it is the Tongqing Hao. And Tongqing Hao was based in EU and not by chance. And another company that came later, the next centuries, in 1880, was the Songping Hao. And Songping Hao even made a branch of the company directly in Hong Kong to facilitate the export. But in these centuries, 18th and 19th centuries, not only Hong Kong developed an interest for Pu'erh, but also actually the emperor. So in these centuries, Pu'erh became also a tea for the emperor, so it was a tribute tea that was brought to Beijing by land. So also in this case, all the way from Yunnan to Beijing is about 2,000 kilometers. On the horses, it takes several months to do it. So now that you know a little bit about the ancient history of Pu'erh, we have to look what happened actually in the past century. We have to look more about the recent history of Pu'erh. With the Second World War, the tea trade in EU came almost to a halt. The trade and the production of Pu'erh slowed down extremely because of the war, but it never stopped, and that's important. And in particular also the export to Hong Kong never stopped. Now after the Second World War, we have in 1949 the foundation of the People's Republic of China, and there things changed once again. So with this new era, all the companies were actually monopolized by the state, and this is also the case for the tea production. So basically the farmer did not anymore produce the tea themselves, but they were just picking the leaves, producing matcha, and then giving that to the factory, to the state-owned factory. And also under this period, the export to Hong Kong continued, made by the state factory. But what really matters is that actually the knowledge of processing, producing the tea and so on got a little bit lost in EU. And then we have to move farther later to the days, even actually after the end of the People's Republic of China, I think in 1976. There was it took a little bit of time until the tea trade came back to what was before, actually, and in particular, actually, already in the 80s and actually in the 90s as well, in Yunnan, people did not really drink pu-erh, because we have said, I mean, we had pu-erh for export, we had pu-erh drunk by the emperor, but what about the Yunnan residents? They didn't really drink pu-erh. They knew pu-erh, of course, but pu-erh for them was rather a gift to be given to friends that were visiting. And actually, as everywhere in China, also the Yunnanese drank green tea, the local green tea. I have friends of my age that live in Yunnan, and where they were teenager and young, they remember that their father and grandfather never drank pu-erh. And now we come to another point. I told you before that the tea was transported to Hong Kong overseas, and actually overland and overseas, but then between the 50s and the 70s of the past centuries, 1950s and 1970s, there was also a railway in China, and so tea could arrive in Hong Kong much faster, and the tea that arrived in that way was not really liked by the Hong Kongese, that they were saying this is too fresh, and they were just storing for aging. And this was the time when in Kunming and in Menghai a new process method developed, the production of Sheng Pu'er, which resemble actually the taste of an aged pu'er. And Sheng Pu'er was invented not for the local consume. In fact, we say the pu'er was not consumed in Yunnan and very little in China, but it was actually made for Hong Kong. And we are in the mid-70s when this development happened. And now we have to move a little bit later. And in 1997, what happened in 1997? In 1997, Hong Kong went back to China. So Hong Kong people were really afraid of this change. After 100 years they had been under the UK. They were really afraid of the change, and many of them in the years before moved abroad. And when they moved abroad, they sold their tea. So they had large quantity of tea stored, and they sold it. And they sold it to whom? Mainly to Taiwan. So Taiwan in the early 90s got a lot of aged pu'er from Hong Kong. And now what happened? It happened that in this time we have also the so-called reform era in China. So there is a new growth of economy in China, and as well in Taiwan, and some more wealthy Taiwanese in the early 90s started to travel to Yunnan. Why? Because they were in search of the pu'er. They were in search of that type of pu'er that they have bought from Hong Kong, and they really wanted to find in the original place. They have read and they have listened about EU, and they traveled to EU. I think the first Taiwanese that traveled to EU was in 1994. And when he arrived in EU, actually, he didn't really find, or the group of people didn't really find what they were expecting, because still in those days, people in EU didn't really know how to produce tea. They didn't really know what is aged tea, because they were giving anything anyway to the factories. And the Taiwanese made them aware that actually pu'er became quite popular, and also the price already raised. So I believe also because of the price and economic interest, the local EU government started to listen to the Taiwanese and to help the renaissance of pu'er. So they have searched in the cities, in the village, the older people, they still remember how tea was done back in the days, and how it was pressed, for example, with stone and not with the machine that were used in the factory, that came originally actually from the eastern part of, from the western part of Sichuan, from Menghai. And sorry, little break, I'm speaking too much here. All right, and this was because of the Taiwanese that we have this renaissance of pu'er, and also the definition of new criteria. Because in the 80s and in the early 90s, for example, there was no difference in price between terrace tea and forestry. Teas that were made from trees in the forest or was made from bushes on the terraces costed actually the same amount of money. But then Taiwan started pointing out the importance of Gushu, of forestry, of avoiding intense cultivation and having the trees that grow in the forest amid other plants, and basically also they brought the concept of aging. So old trees, aged tea, single tea garden, and all these were then boosted by the locals because they wanted actually to sell what at the highest price. And now we come actually to the 21st century, actually to just let's say 20 years ago, and why there was this new hype. You have to bring now this in the context of where China was standing. China, starting from the 90s, had an increase in an increase in economy and in wealth that was massive. I personally remember a friend of me that is more or less of my age. She now runs a tea shop, and she has a very, she's not rich, but she has a good life, you know. She goes to the tea house in the morning, she sits there, she drinks tea with the customers. She has a lady that works for her and make the hard work, so when she has to pack tea for the customer and so on, there is someone else doing it for her. And what she actually does is a very easy life, more or less, right? And when she told me about her teenager time, when she was working every day in the rice field, that was, now if you meet her, you cannot imagine her, you know, kneeling down and working from morning to the evening in the rice field, but that was what her family was doing. They didn't have much, they had to do that just to reach the end of the month. And this is the situation that happened in China in the 90s and also even more in this century. So the new generation found themselves with new money, and a new identity to be found. And what they did, after also the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976, where all the past had to be removed, they actually wanted to go back to the past and to find a new identity. Also, authenticity was an important concept, and they follow the trend of the Taiwanese basically, and they started to develop also an interest in aged Sheng Pu'er. The price of Pu'er raised and raised year after year, in particular starting from the early of this century until 2007, where the price was super high and there was a collapse. After the collapse, it actually recovered relatively quickly. There was just a small collapse again in 2011, but actually the price of Pu'er kept rising and is still rising today, following Chinese economy. And what is also important, that also in the past 10 years, the price difference between forestry and terrace tea even increased further, yeah. And now we speak about Europe and America and US. So people like us that are into Gongfu tea and follow the trend of China, right? When the people in whole China that are into Gongfu cha start really be fond of Pu'er and became an hype in China, this hype, just with a little bit of delay, was transferred over to Europe and the US. And that's where we are now today. And so you have to connect a little bit all the history, how actually in Hong Kong tea was important, the Pu'er was aged, important was aging because they wanted to have these even moldy taste, because the aging in Hong Kong get really moldy. They pair very well with the dim sum. And then how the tea was brought to Taiwan, the Taiwanese went to Yunnan and allowed the renaissance of Pu'er in a time where Chinese economy was increasing at extremely high pace, and China got involved into that. Because they had money, they had a new identity to search, they wanted something authentic, and also something that is very important is Chinese attitude. They have an attitude when they want really to boast about their belongings. It's something that sometimes it really you feel very awkward in certain situations when you go in China and someone introduced you to someone else, and this someone else have to point out how expensive is this and that thing that he belongs and so on. It is done to the extreme. I found myself many times in this strange situation. For example, when I was brought to some friends of friends to drink tea, and they were just starting to say, you know, this teapot is from the Ming Dynasty, I bought it for so much money, this from so much, is an attitude that we don't see here. I mean, not to that level, but in China is normal. And having an aged tea and being able to tell the friends, look, I have this cake, it is worth thousands of euros, it is 30 years old, is a simple reason just to buy it and getting into it. Alright, so today we've spoken about the history of Pu'erh. I hope I could render a little bit all the dynamics, it's very complex indeed, that happened over the centuries and they brought us where we are today. But you might wonder actually, what about the taste? It's just about history, doesn't it taste good? Well, you know, I have to say I'm drinking Pu'erh, I like to drink aged Pu'erh. Pu'erh is one of my top 3 favorite teas, and I don't drink it, I believe at least, I don't drink it because of the history, I drink it because of the taste. But if it wasn't for that history, I wouldn't find myself now here drinking Pu'erh. So in the next video, I will speak about the taste of aged Pu'erh, how it is different from the taste of fresh Pu'erh and from the taste of any other teas, and also how to distinguish the taste between humid storage, wet storage, like in Hong Kong, and a dry storage, for example, like in Kunming or in my home here. And so Colorado is very, very dry. So let's stay tuned, let's watch the next video and you will learn more about the taste. And if you have any question or any comments, please go ahead and write them in here below the screen. If you're new here in our channel, you know, go ahead and subscribe, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up. It's a lot of effort on doing this video, and your likes and your support is very much appreciated. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.